come today to celebrate and remember the life of my father, Julius Rivera, in this compelling and thought-provoking place. I want to remember his vigorous mind, his kindness, his conservative sartorial style, his liberal politics, his handsome things, his handsome character, and his handsome self. I could regale you with the professional accomplishments of my father, which range from writer and editor and philosopher to priest, professor, and activist. Instead, I'm going to share with you a few memories of him just being my father. My earliest memory of my father is of us three, he, my mother, and I, laughing in the VW Bug, with me standing in the back, my arms resting on the backs of their seats, driving down the alley to the beautiful house in Houston. He was my Prince Charming to my Cinderella at my 4th Halloween. He took me to see the premiere of The Sound of Music in Santiago, Chile. He poked fun at me when, at a rare church Thanksgiving event, I told the crowd that I was thankful he was there. My father was the best kind of adventurer, always willing to try new things, but hewing to the things that were tried and true. That is why he wore Brooks Brothers suits from 1952 to 2014. That is why when we cleaned out his closet, there was classic clothing that Julian, Kumar, Marcos, and the girls all felt they could use without embarrassment. He never followed fads, and so we didn't have silky shirts from the 1970s to contend with. I remember him using his machete, which he kept in the trunk of the car. He once, when we were in Herman Park, hacked through the underbrush, and together we built a shelter that stood for 10 years. He was also an avid camper. Once when my mother needed a weekend to herself, he came home from work and left the car running while he loaded it with gear and pulled steaks from the freezer. In his haste, he forgot the salt, so we spent the whole weekend eating unsalted meat. I loved how he let us ride standing up in the VW Bug convertible with our heads up the top on our way home from the swimming pool. At 50, he was strong enough and crazy enough to carry a tall ladder 2 blocks from Buffalo Bayou to retrieve 2 beautiful Brazilian kites that tangled up in the tallest trees. He was humble enough to admit that when a beautiful gypsy woman hugged him in Medellin, it wasn't because he was handsome, it was because she wanted his wallet. This was the only time he was successfully pickpocketed, by the way, and P.S., he was handsome. Once he called me up to exclaim, "Guess what? The Pope and Bono are working to promote world peace." And then he stopped and said, "Who's Bono?" And then there was the time he called me up to ask who was Pee Wee Herman. I was usually the one who called him with questions. For years, I spoke with him daily until his hearing made conversation difficult. Our conversations ran from literature and agronomy to politics and popular culture. He took an appropriate interest in my writing, and some of my short stories have Spanish words which he gave to me. He also enjoyed evaluating the characters on As the World Turns, or some of the Mexican novelas, and he was full of dichos. My favorite was, "En boca cerrada no entran las moscas," which means, for those of you who don't speak Spanish, if you talk too much, you let the flies in. He claimed to be guilty of talking too much, but I always felt he was a great listener. He was an iconoclast in a world full of sycophants. When I wrote a children's story involving the Luis Jimenez alligator statue in El Paso Central Plaza, he shuddered because he liked turning the lights off of the Jimenez statue at the UTEP library. He was also guilty of turning the cowboy statue on the 4th floor of the UTEP library to the corner so that nobody could see it because he hated what cowboys represented in popular culture. He also braved criticism when he called for a boycott of Henry Kissinger when Kissinger spoke in El Paso. The El Paso Times often received my dad's letters to the editor on issues facing the city, and they were usually published. He arranged a tour of Ciudad Juarez for me when I wanted to photograph the sites of the Mujeres Muertes. He also marched for peace outside the federal courthouse. My father explored with us themes of poverty and power, freedom of expression, opportunity and individual drive, all while driving, working, resting, and laughing. One of the last jokes he told me was on Monday, February 17th, 2 days before he died. I teased him about my having a milkshake and he having none, and he said, "Oh, how rude." Of course, we had a milkshake for him, too, but he chose to drink as his last meal a bowl of soup that Barbara Childs made for him. My father was clean. He always smelled good, like soap, Brooks Brothers cologne, wool, and starch cotton, and so it was in death. He still smelled like the soap he had only applied Sunday. And he smelled so good when I kissed him goodbye just before Liliana and I walked his stretcher out of the house and to the hearse. Finally, I am so relieved and proud to be able to say that my father's last words to me were, "I love you too." Thank you.